10 bizarre military laws. We all know the military can be a strict place. However, some of the rules and regulations members need to follow, as laid out in laws like the USS Uniform Code of Military Justice, are surprising and even a bit funny. Could you follow these rules and cut it in the military? 1. Trimming the stash. A rip-roaring good mustache, a la Teddy Roosevelt, is something some men aspire to. In particular, a strong handlebar mustache has had a revival in recent years thanks to the hipster community. But if you're a hipster who wants to join the United States Air Force, you might be disappointed to learn that you have to shave off that beautiful lip foliage, or at least make sure it complies with regulation. Overall, the Air Force has some stringent rules on general attire, but in 2022 they relaxed these somewhat. While mustaches are allowed, they have to follow a strict degree of bushiness as laid out in a departmental memorandum. Quote, "No portion of the mustache will extend below the lip line of the upper lip. Additionally, the mustache will not go beyond a horizontal line extending across the corners of the mouth and no more than a quarter inch beyond a vertical line drawn from the corner of the mouth." End quote. 2. Adultery. If you're thinking military life is an excuse for the Casanovas of the world to have fling after fling while their partner sits at home, happy and oblivious, you might be in for a shock. Sometimes the phrase "getting caught with your pants down" can be very literal. Obviously, adultery isn't a great look anywhere or at any time, but if you're in the military, you could lose a whole lot more than just your marriage. If your affair, or as it's known in the military, extramarital sexual conduct is exposed and reflects poorly on the military as a whole, you could face serious charges. Depending on how bad you made the military look, you could receive a reduction in rank, disciplinary action, partial or full loss of pay, or even confinement or a dishonorable discharge. 3. Get off the grass. This unofficial rule is less about discipline and more about aesthetics. If hundreds of parade rest troops are wandering back and forth over the same portions of grass over and over again, naturally the state of it quickly goes from a charming green to a churned muddy brown. Across the internet, there's plenty of stories from members of the military sharing those moments they unintentionally touched grass. The other side of this strange rule is that the grass is seen as a metaphor. Taking a quick shortcut across the greenery instead of following the path symbolically tells your senior officials that you're willing to take shortcuts in other aspects of your life. Not something a sergeant with strict routines and regulations wants to hear. 4. Getting inked. Tattoos aren't outright banned. Many veterans have tattoos that symbolize their service, and there's often pictures of young Army men and women with visible tattoos. And with their rise in popularity, so many younger people now have tattoos that the bans were starting to affect military recruitment, so they relaxed the rules. But the placement of your ink still matters. And there are still absolute no-nos in the crossover world of military life and body art. For one, nothing offensive or discriminatory like displays of racism, sexism, extremism, or anything obscene. Which sounds like a good rule generally, really. For 2, the new policy states tattoos can be on arms, legs, and torsos, but shouldn't be visible on the hands, wrists, head, face, lips, tongue, or neck. The strictness of this can vary by military branch, however. Nowadays, members of the Navy are permitted a single 1-inch or less neck tattoo. In the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marine Corps, a solitary finger ring tattoo per hand is permitted. In the Air Force, that's restricted to one hand only. So, if you're considering joining the military, you might want to think before you ink. 5. Jumping into water. If you're aboard a cramped, slightly sweaty boat, jumping into water to cool off sounds like a wonderful idea. However, it's definitely not an advisable one if you're aboard a military vessel, not least because they're pretty big and it would take a while to climb back up. There are good reasons this is a silly move. Most prominently, it can be a fairly dangerous trick to attempt, but also because it's in direct violation of military law, as covered under Article 87 of the Code. If a member of the military were to jump from any vessel operated or controlled by the armed forces, whether at port, anchor, or sea, they can receive a dishonorable discharge, forfeit all pay and allowances, and/or get up to 2 years of forced confinement. 6. No criticizing the government. No matter where you are in the world, it's generally frowned upon to speak out against your government as a member of its armed forces. As the final line of defense, a military's members have to be seen as politically neutral. In the UK, military members can't join trade unions or speak out against any issues they may have with the existing government or its policies, for example. In the US, they lay out the restriction to refer specifically to certain officials, including the President, Vice President, Congress, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of any military department, Secretary of Homeland Security, or the governor or legislature of any state, territory, or region. They also can't have any political signs or bumper stickers or attend political rallies or demonstrations when in uniform. 7. The stragglers. If you have a bit of a habit of not paying attention and wandering away, then the military isn't for you. Stragglers, aka those who get separated from their unit, better have a good reason for being left behind, or else you could face the full force of military might. That's because straggling is incredibly dangerous. It can cause disruption and break down military structure and planning, leaving your comrades open and vulnerable to attack in an active war zone. It could have catastrophic consequences. And no, I was just admiring the scenery that won't cut it. If accused of straggling, you could get a conviction that remains on your permanent record forever, tanking your ability to get bonuses or promotions. Your pay could be reduced, or you could even be shut up in a month-long confinement. 8. Careful where you put your hands. While the United States Navy relaxed this rule in 2024, before that, putting your hands in your pockets was seen as a cardinal offense punishable by death. Well, not really, but it was perceived as lazy, inappropriate, and not keeping with the demeanor and appearance of a military official. Nowadays, sailors can rest their hands in their pockets day and night, providing they're off duty. It doesn't affect anyone's safety and doesn't stop them from saluting when appropriate. And while the UK might not officially have any similar rules regarding your pants location, it's long since been regarded as not quite cricket, as it displays a lack of discipline. 9. Malingering. Ever pulled a sickie to get out of work? Well, that's basically what malingering is. But in the military, the consequences of it are worse than a simple slap on the wrist. For one, you need to cause self-inflicted harm to yourself. Simply lying in bed and claiming a headache doesn't usually cut it. And those accused of malingering have gone to lengths, like feigning a disability to avoid work. Whether you simply call in sick or physically caused self-inflicted harm, adjust the severity of your punishment. Those who just had a fake tummy bug can get a year's confinement, loss of pay, and a dishonorable discharge, all of which sounds pretty bad. But if you cause yourself physical harm, then you risk up to 5 years confinement, or even 10 if done in an active war zone. 10. Dueling. Maybe you've watched too much Hamilton, or maybe you can't take your Barack mate's obnoxious jokes anymore. Either way, challenging them to a duel to settle your differences is decidedly not the right approach. Of course, that never stopped anyone, even if it's not advisable. While dueling used to have its own specific code in military law, it's now part of the General Endangerment Offenses Rule, as there's been no recorded disciplinary action for dueling for at least 14 years. Nevertheless, it is a time-honored tradition in history, with some of the most famous men of all time believing a duel could settle nearly any issue. President Andrew Jackson was a famous example of this, as were Alexander Hamilton and President Abraham Lincoln. If caught dueling nowadays, not only would you look a bit silly, but you could also face a forfeiture of all pay and allowances, 1 year's confinement, or even a dishonorable discharge.